Back for another edition of Plus Money Picks. This week we're going to have UFC 265 coming off of UFC Vegas 33, which is a pretty rough one, which I'm sure it was for a lot of other bettors. There are a lot of favorites that were supposed to have an easy time in their fights, and that was not the case. Strickland performed pretty well in the main event, which is what I expected. And just kind of got burned on some spots that I wasn't expecting to get burned on and had some parlays busted. So this week, just going to have a lot more educated bets. Not going to just blindly fade certain people. And just find the real smart spots this week to hopefully start with a profitable card. So let's get right into these fights. All right, first fight of the card, we have a fairly low-level one as far as these guys being pretty new to the UFC. We have Jamie Simmons versus Johnny Munoz Jr. Johnny Munoz is 10-1, and Jamie Simmons is 7-3. So let's go through some pluses and negatives for each fighter. So Munoz, he took his last matchup with Nate Maness on short notice, and he looked actually pretty good in that fight, and Maness ended up being his first loss. But Maness is pretty tough to deal with. He's long and rangy, and he has some pretty good striking. Munoz was taking down Maness in that one, showed some good takedowns, and he was pretty strong with his grappling, had a pretty good ground and pound moment early in that fight, and just kind of like lost the fight as it went on, which is pretty understandable for how late the matchup was put together. When you're looking at the scores for that fight, they look like there was a 10-8, but I think it was just because, that was just because Munoz ended up losing a point for a nut shot in that one. And, he didn't really show great striking in that fight. So I guess that's one downside that I could see. Jamie Simmons is a guy that's pretty powerful on the feet. And I think that's his path to victory in this one, is if he could keep it standing. But along with that, Munoz did at least show some ground and pound, which I do like with a guy like Simmons. So Jamie Simmons, he has all three of his losses are by finish. 2 of them are by knockout, 1 of them by submission. He seems to use a lot of energy for everything that he throws and everything that he does. So I don't see him doing well if this fight goes 3 rounds. He would have to just kind of win the first 2, I think. He was about to lose his fight before he got into the UFC, but the guy kind of ruined his finish of Jamie Simmons by throwing an illegal knee, and then from there, Jamie Simmons was able to reverse position. Well, not reverse position, but kind of turn the tide in the fight and end up finishing his opponent. I do think Jamie Simmons can get caught by a good grappler, and I think Johnny Munoz is a fairly good grappler. But Simmons, he's strong enough that I wouldn't be surprised if he gets a takedown of his own. I just don't think that he wants to go to the ground with Munoz. So I'm leaning Munoz in this one. I think he either gets it done by submission or decision. And right now, at the time that I'm making this prediction, Johnny Munoz is a pretty big favorite. He is minus 225 right now, and Jamie Simmons is plus 190. I don't really think I would want to bet that, at least straight, just because these are fairly inexperienced fighters, and I think, there's a chance that Jamie Simmons can pull this off, so I don't think I really like minus 225 for Johnny Munoz. So then we're going to move on to the next fight, and the next fight, according to Tapology, will be Draco Rodriguez versus Vince Morales. Draco Rodriguez is 7-2, and Vince Morales is 9-5. Both of these guys in the UFC haven't fared so well. Draco Rodriguez in his UFC debut was knocked out by Ayman Zahabi pretty badly, and Vince Morales most recently lost to Chris Gutierrez, although that fight did take place a weight class up. Then he has also lost to Benito Lopez, has a win over Ayman Zahabi, a loss to Songdong, and that is his UFC experience so far, so 1-3 in the UFC. Vince Morales is going to be a bit older. He is over 30, and Draco Rodriguez is just a little bit over 25. Height, reach, these guys aren't too much different. But then when we're looking at everything else in the matchup, so when I was going through Rodriguez, his fight tape, honestly wasn't very impressed with the guy. I do think that there's more value on Vince Morales. For Rodriguez, both of his losses are by knockout, and obviously Amin Zahabi was one of those. Rodriguez just doesn't seem very powerful on the feet. I could see that he is a pretty tricky grappler, and I think he actually, because of that, he has more finishes by submission than by knockout, and that's actually how he won on Contender Series, was by a triangle choke. But I think Morales is probably going to be the one with more volume in this one. Although Morales isn't all that great defensively, I just think that he's going to look a little bit better on the feet, or at least he's going to be willing to throw more and maybe even land more powerful shots because he kind of just goes for it more. Whereas in the fights, at least the fights I've seen of Rodriguez, he looked pretty tentative. And I wouldn't be surprised if that's even more the case after getting knocked out so horribly. So I think as of right now, there's a little bit more value on Vince Morales, especially with him having dog odds on him right now. He's plus 120, and Draco Rodriguez is minus 140. As far as a bet, I would lean Vince Morales, but I don't think this is really one that I'm going to touch unless the odds get really skewed and Vince Morales ends up a really hefty underdog. So, next on the card, we have Victoria Leonardo versus Melissa Gatto. And this is one where I feel like people are probably kind of just making blind decisions on this one just because Victoria Leonardo most recently was destroyed by Manon Fiorot. But when you look at her record, Leonardo has only lost to some pretty good people. She actually has 2 losses. 2 of her losses are to Miranda Maverick. And then obviously she has also lost to Manon Fiorot. And I believe she also has a loss to Erin Blanchfield, who's a pretty talented female fighter as well. Melissa Gatto hasn't really faced all that good of competition. She does have a win over Carol Rosa, which I do think is impressive to have that win on your record. But when you watch how that went down, kind of weird. Rosa was actually kind of controlling that fight, and then Gatto got a submission off her back. When I saw the rest of Gatto's fights, it just wasn't impressive, and I saw one of the fights that is counted as a draw on her record, and it seemed like she lost that fight pretty badly. So she's just not impressive. I didn't see much striking from her that I thought was all that great. She just it doesn't seem like she has all that great of experience. And then on top of that, I think she's had most of her fights at 135, and this will be at 125, so we don't really know how she's going to look. But so far from what I've seen, she's someone with pretty weak takedown defense, and I think some of that might be part of her game because she wants it to be on the ground, but that doesn't always work in the UFC. I think since Leonardo has a submission game of her own, there's the chance that even if Gatto gets it to the ground, she doesn't get that finish. And I just think that Leonardo probably has the better striking in this one, and there's a chance that she edges out the decision. Again, I think there's more value on the underdog in this one. And I think the odds might get more messed up just because of, like I said, a lot of people are going to blindly bet against Leonardo, especially after they see Carol Rosa on Melissa Gatto's record. So who knows, these odds could get bigger, but right now Leonardo is plus 109 and Melissa Gatto is minus 129. I put a small bet on Leonardo just because I feel like this is a good opportunity to fade a debuting fighter. But I don't think I'll have too much exposure on this one. And if there was a prop bet, maybe take Leonardo by decision. That might get juicy later in the week, but that's how I'm setting up for this fight. All right, so we have Miles Johns and Anderson dos Santos. I did break this fight down not too long ago when this fight was originally scheduled. So Miles Johns, he is a pretty clean striker with his hands, good boxing. He's got a good takedown game of his own and just a pretty good wrestler. Anderson dos Santos, he is all about getting it to the ground, working submissions. On the feet, he's pretty much just going to be winging bombs. So he's not the greatest with volume. Miles Johns is a really good volume striker. So that's why I was always kind of leaning towards taking Miles Johns by decision. yeah, I think that's the best prop bet for sure on this fight. And I just don't see a huge path to victory for Anderson Dos Santos except for just catching a finish somehow, which Miles Johns has been knocked out once, but only once, and that's his only loss. So I think he should have the striking to be able to just edge out Anderson Dos Santos, which is the way that Dos Santos has lost before to guys like Andre Ewell. He even got 10-8'd on the feet. So, yeah, I'm just going to take Miles Johns by decision. And Miles Johns is actually a pretty decent favorite at this point. He is all the way up to, I had seen him at minus 200. I don't know if he's minus 205 currently, and Anderson Dos Santos coming back at plus 175. So don't necessarily like the odds being skewed that much, and don't really know how much exposure I'll end up having for this one with those odds. I might just go with the Miles Johns by decision instead of betting him straight. So now we have Manel Kopp and Ode Osborne. So in this one, Ode Osborne is going to be the bigger guy. Ode Osborne is 5'7" with a 72-inch reach. Manel Kopp is 5'5" with a 68-inch reach, so pretty sizable reach advantage for Ode Osborne. Ode Osborne is 4-1 in his last 5, but none of those fights have been at 125. He knocked out Jerome Rivera. Not the best win. He got choked out by Brian Kelleher, and then won a fight on Contender, and then his other 2 fights were outside of the UFC. Manel Kopp has lost his first 2 UFC fights. His last one was by split decision. So yeah, he's got to get it going now. Manel Kopp, he struggled with volume in his matchups. He's just kind of had these periods of just not really throwing too much at times where he really needs to pick it up to win rounds. So he has a negative striking differential in the UFC. He has decent takedown defense, but I think there's a decent chance that he could get brought down by a guy like Ode Osborne, who is really big and strong. And yeah, Kopp just doesn't have the best striking defense. So with that reach advantage, that is something to look out for with him facing Osborne. But Kopp, he only has 2 finish losses. They're both by submission. He does have better competition on his record. And he can be really quick when he does decide to throw. But yeah, and he's also just had experience making 125 and going the full 3 rounds. So I like seeing that out of him. On the Osborne side, his one thing that really just stands out, of course, is that reach advantage. He also only has 2 finish losses, which happen to be by submission. And he is really quick and powerful. And with him coming down to 125, I guess 135 is pretty much like his natural walk-around weight, so he might not look too bad. But, we're just really not sure how he'll look at 125 and how much his cardio is really going to hold up. So that's why I'm leaning Manel Kopp in this one, but I think this is definitely one that you want to wait till the weigh-ins happen. And with Manel Kopp being all the way up around like minus 200, I don't think that I could really feel all that confident in him. So probably won't have too much exposure to this one. And yeah, Manel Kopp's definitely another guy that I wouldn't feel too confident throwing in any parlays this week. So yeah, that's how I'm leaning. I think Manel Kopp, I don't know, it's really hard to predict an outcome because both these guys are typically finishers, but then we've been seeing Manel Kopp go to a decision when he's been at 125. So I kind of think that this is going to be Manel Kopp by decision. So then when we move up in the card, we have Karolina Kowalkiewicz versus Jessica Penne. And Jessica Penne, I did actually bet her in her last fight against Lupi Godinez, but that was more because I saw it as a pretty low-level women's fight, and Godinez became a pretty sizable favorite in that one. And watching tape on her, I kind of saw that she wasn't the best grappling-wise, and that was Penne's best path. And that is kind of how she ended up edging it out in the judges' eyes. But yeah, after watching that, I knew I wasn't really going to bet Jessica Penne anymore. Karolina Kowalkiewicz in this matchup, she's going to be the one with a lot more volume. She hits a lot harder, and her finish losses are only to really strong competition. But Kowalkiewicz is on a 4-fight losing streak. Janan was able to get 5 of 6 takedowns on her, but I don't see Penne being able to do that. Kowalkiewicz doesn't have the best fight IQ, and in her fight against Janan, she was having some issues with her eye, which I think contributed a lot to how lopsided that fight was. But it is something to also monitor for this fight. And Kowalkiewicz technically has a negative striking differential, but Jessica Penne very low volume, so it should be Kowalkiewicz landing more in this one. What I didn't like seeing with Kowalkiewicz is she does tend to clinch up a lot, which may open up an opportunity for Jessica Penne just to jump guard, but I think Kowalkiewicz should be okay on this one. Penne, like I said, just very low volume, has horrible striking defense. She's actually 38 years old already. Kowalkiewicz is getting up there in age too, but Jessica Penne is definitely more worn out. Jessica Penne has been outstruck in all but one of her UFC fights. She really didn't look great in her last win against Godinez, and that was someone that she had a 6-inch reach advantage over. So yeah, she would also be on a 4-fight losing streak if it wasn't for that fight. Jessica Penne has no finish wins in the UFC. She also has a striking differential by about 2 full significant strikes. And she has 3 finish losses, 2 knockout losses, 1 submission loss. And although her path to victory is with grappling, she isn't very good at getting her own takedown. So yeah, just not really any reason to bet Jessica Penne in this one. The odds are pretty close just because of the success that these women have been having recently in their careers is they've been struggling. So Kowalkiewicz is only about -120 and Jessica Penne is +100. But I felt good enough about Kowalkiewicz in this one to have a small bet on her straight. But yeah, definitely not a fight that you want to have too much exposure on, and it isn't a fight that you're really going to want to parlay too much. So next on the card, we have Ed Hermann and Alonzo Menafield. Alonzo Menafield is coming up on -230. Currently on BetOnline, he's -235, and Ed Hermann is +200. So in their last 5 fights, Ed Hermann is 3-2. He knocked out Patrick Cummins. He beat Kadis Ibrahimov and technically beat Mike Rodriguez by submission, but really he was finished before that. And so just not very impressive wins out of those out of that 3-fight win streak that he's on. Alonzo Menafield recently had a submission win over Fabio Cherant, who I don't really think is ready for the UFC. Then he was knocked out before that up against OSP pretty badly, and lost to Devin Clark by decision. And then before that, knocked out Paul Craig. So I would say that's probably one of his more impressive wins so far. And then, of course, before that, actually, he had even knocked out Vinicius Moreira. But again, that's not that impressive of a win because Vinicius Moreira kind of only got knocked out in the UFC. So yeah, these guys haven't had that great of competition in their recent fights. But it's hard not to go with Alonzo Menafield in this one. I think he'll definitely have the power advantage, and Ed Hermann's path is most likely just to get this to the ground, and Alonzo Menafield has decent takedown defense. He definitely has better takedown defense than Mike Rodriguez. And just not really going to bet a 41-year-old Ed Hermann at this point, so I think the side is Alonzo Menafield. But yeah, not a fan of him being over -200, so I don't think I'm going to bet him straight or put Alonzo Menafield in any parlays or anything. But this could be one that you take a bet on fight doesn't go the distance, and maybe look at some over-unders, or even like a Alonzo Menafield by knockout prop. But we haven't seen the props for this card yet. So then moving up in the card, I have Rafaelfaz and Bobby Green. So the bout order that I have earlier in the card, the bout order has been kind of getting switched up as I've been making the predictions. It says now that Draco Rodriguez and Vince Morales is after Ed Hermann and Alonzo Menafield, but I'm going to break down Rafaelfaz and Bobby Green. So this one, pretty straightforward. Both these guys are strikers. If anyone was going to be getting a takedown, it would probably be Bobby Green. But yeah, Rafaelfaz, he just has really clean striking. I believe he's even a striking coach at Tiger Muay Thai. And because of his advantage in striking, he's all the way up over minus 300, which I think, honestly, is pretty fair. Fiziev, he is 4-1 in his last 5, with his most recent win being a knockout over Moicano, pretty impressively. Bobby Green, I mean, technically he could be on a 4-fight win streak in some people's eyes because people thought that he beat Thiago Moises, but that one's pretty debatable. And I think just where these guys are at this point, Bobby Green, he's coming up on 35, whereas Fiziev, he's kind of on the rise right now. And I think he'll be a highly ranked fighter pretty soon. And I think Bobby Green's not really going to reach that at this point. So I'm going to go with Fiziev. I honestly think that he's one of the first people in this card that's decently parlayable. But Bobby Green keeps fights close, so you never know. But I'll take Fiziev by decision in this one. And I think there is a chance that he even knocks out Bobby Green, even though Bobby Green's typically tough to finish. So then next we have Songdong and Casey Kenny, and this was one that I started looking out for immediately just because these guys right off the bat were lined really closely. And I ended up betting Casey Kenny when they were both minus 110. Songdong, he is 16-5, Casey Kenny is 16-3. So pretty similar records out of these guys. And then Casey Kenny in his last 5, he is 3-2. His losses in his last 5 have came to really good competition. He lost to Merab Dvalishvili, which who isn't losing to him at this point. And then he had a split decision loss with Dominic Cruz, which is definitely not the worst loss to have on your record. Song Yadong, he beat Vince Morales, then knocked out Alejandro Perez. He had a draw with Cody Stamann, which I think that one, there's definitely a world where Cody Stamann gets that decision. And then he beat Marlon Vera, which is, again, another one that people highly debate on whether or not he won that fight. And then just recently lost to Kyler Phillips. So honestly, there's a world where Song Yadong is 0-3 in his last 3. He's definitely not someone that I'm super impressed with. Whereas Casey Kenny, I think, is someone that's going to hang around in the rankings for a while. Just because having close fights with Dominic Cruz kind of shows that you're at that point. So let's go through some pluses and negatives for each guy. On the plus side for Song Yadong, he does have power in his hands and he has decent volume. But like I said, he could potentially be 0-3 in his last 3 fights if the judges had scored slightly differently. And one thing I didn't like seeing out of Song Yadong was he doesn't have the greatest takedown defense. Casey Kenny's takedown defense is actually pretty decent, but his percentage is skewed because he fought Merab and Ray Borg, both guys that tend to get a lot of takedowns. Casey Kenny's never been finished. He has pretty good volume as well. I would say he has the wrestling advantage in this fight. I did really like seeing the body kicks that he displayed against Alatang, but he is coming off of a loss, and it's a split decision loss. And I think, Song Yadong tends to kind of get the rub in close fights, so that's something to be a little nervous about. But yeah, in a closely lined fight like this, I really do like Casey Kenny. I would guess that he gets it done by decision just because Song Yadong's a pretty tough dude. That's my lean on this one. So then following Song Yadong, another really closely lined fight, we have Tecia Torres and Angela Hill. And honestly, I was pretty surprised that Angela Hill has become the underdog in this one. But then when you watch tape, I guess I could kind of see it. Tecia Torres, I think what is really changing the odds is that Tecia Torres has a win over Angela Hill. Tecia Torres 12-5, Angela Hill 13-9, and we'll go through their last 5 fights. So, Tisha Torres had lost to Joanna. No shame in that. Lost to Zhang Weili. Also no shame in that. And then lost to Marina Rodriguez. Again, no shame in that at all. And then beat Brianna Van Buren. Not that impressive. And then had a doctor stoppage win over Sam Hughes. And that fight, I mean, Sam Hughes just was not ready for that kind of a matchup. So then we're going through the 5 for Angela Hill. Knocked out Hannah Cyphers. Beat Loma Lukbunmi, which that's the win that looks a lot better now. She had a split decision loss to Claudia Gadelha, but a lot of people say she won that fight. She had a split decision loss against Michelle Waterson. Again, there's a lot of people that would argue that she won that fight. And then, most recently is coming off of a decision win against Ashley Yoder, which, with how this last weekend went, we know that that's not exactly the most impressive one either. But potentially, if the split decisions had gone her way, she could be 5-0 in her last 5. When I was looking at how these women fight, size-wise, they're really similar. But I believe Angela Hill has a reach advantage in this one. But Angela Hill... we'll start on the Tisha Torres side. So Tisha Torres, she doesn't really have a ton of finishing ability. She got that knockout recently, but that really was just a doctor stoppage because of an eye issue with Sam Hughes. So Tisha Torres hasn't really had an impressive win in a long time. And she's really dependent on going forward. She kind of just makes like these big lunges forward and tries to throw big kicks in order to get her opponent to back up. But with that, she does have really good speed and aggression, since that is her fighting style, and I think that's something that could impress judges. So as someone that's backing Angela Hill, that is something that I'm a little bit worried about, is that Tisha Torres is just going to look like the more aggressive, pressuring fighter. And even if she's not landing quite as well, some judges might score that more highly. Angela Hill does have 3 split decision losses in the UFC. So who knows if that's only the only deciding factor. Angela Hill could easily lose this one. Angela Hill, her loss to Tisha Torres was when she was only 2-0, and she's got a ton of experience since then and has made a lot of improvements. And I think Angela Hill, what it came down to for me is that she's better at mixing up her setups for striking. She's not gonna only be going forward. She has good side-to-side movement. I would say that she's the fighter that could still be landing things off her back foot or when she's moving backwards. And I just think that I like the fighting style more of Angela Hill for this one. And I just don't really have a ton of confidence in Tisha Torres. But yeah, I can see it going either way. I'm definitely not going to be parlaying either of these women, but just decided to take Angela Hill just because she ended up being the plus money in this one. And I think when it comes down to it, it should have been at least just a pick 'em. But now at this point, with Tisha Torres being minus 132 and Angela Hill being plus 112, I think it's a dog or pass spot, and Angela Hill's a pretty good underdog to have. So, yeah, and then I'm going to even look at the Angela Hill by decision prop because I think that's the most likely outcome. Following Tisha Torres and Angela Hill, we have Vicente Luque and Michael Chiesa. So this one will be tough because it's a striker versus grappler matchup, and I could really see why this one's been closely lined. As of right now, Luque is minus 117 and Chiesa is minus 103. Chiesa, he's really low volume. That's one thing I didn't really like when I was looking at him. But he has been on a run. So since he's moved up to 170, he is 4-0. He submitted Carlos Condit. He beat Diego Sanchez, beat Rafael dos Anjos, and then most recently beat Neil Magny. And I think Neil Magny is actually the most impressive win out of those 4 because Carlos Condit definitely on his way out of the UFC and was really struggling at the point that Michael Chiesa beat him. And Diego Sanchez, of course, just really hasn't looked good in a long time. And then RDA is a 155 at 170. And then, Neil Magny is a pretty well-rounded fighter, but Neil Magny was kind of engaging in the grappling exchanges a little too much, I think, in that fight. Vicente Luque is also on a win streak. He's on a 3-fight win streak. He beat Nico Price, Randy Brown, and Tyron Woodley. So honestly, I think he has the more impressive wins in his last 3. And then his most recent loss came to Stephen Thompson, which no shame in that. The height and reach-wise, the size difference isn't too much for these guys. And so Luque, he's going to be the one throwing a lot more volume. And because of that volume, Luque is more dangerous as a knockout threat. He has 11 knockout wins. He also has 7 wins by submission. Really good record in the UFC, being 13-3 and only having losses to Thompson and Edwards within those 3. I do also like seeing that he has decent takedown defense, and he can use leg kicks really well, which I think that was one thing that RDA did decently well in his matchup with Chiesa. The only thing is, I did see Luque get taken down by Randy Brown, and that takedown was initiated very similarly to how Chiesa likes to go for takedowns. But then again, Luque did get up really quick from that takedown and then was able to finish that fight. So then when we're looking at Chiesa, he does have 11 wins by submission. I believe that, Luque's only finished losses are by sub, so that's dangerous. He is 11-4 in the UFC, so still has an impressive record. Of course, like I mentioned, he's on that 4-fight win streak, and he's got 4 more takedowns in all those fights, which is something that's very positive for him coming up to 170. But that's all to guys that don't have necessarily remarkable takedown defense. And none of them have volume near Vicente Luque's. He can control people for full rounds on the ground, which is a dangerous characteristic, and he just went 5 rounds in his last fight, so we know that he's going to come in with good cardio. But it really comes down to the fact that Chiesa is so low volume with his striking, because of his takedown heavy approach. So if he's not getting takedowns, I don't really see how he's going to do well in this fight. Chiesa is a guy that's been finished 4 times. He has 3 submission losses and 1 knockout loss. And he's, at this point, I think Luque is the most dangerous guy that he's going to be facing at 170. So there is some danger that he will get knocked out. I'm going to go with Luque in this matchup. So in our new co-main event, since Amanda Nunes has tested positive for COVID-19, we have Jose Aldo and Pedro Munoz, which is another closely lined fight. I see Jose Aldo at -130 and Pedro Munoz coming back at +110. I immediately looked into this one because I thought it would be a good betting spot, and I even bet Jose Aldo when he was around -140. We'll just look into this matchup real quick. So Aldo's going to have a 5-inch reach advantage in this one, which is something that I really liked to see as someone that was going to be backing Aldo in this one. He is coming off a win over Marlon Vera, which is a good win to have on your record. His only submission loss was back in 2005. And Pedro Munoz is pretty dangerous with his submissions, especially his guillotine. Aldo is really good at mixing up his strikes. I'm not as worried about him slowing down in the third, really. And then, looking at that Vera fight, he was able to backpack Marlon Vera for a whole round, which could be something that he goes to again. And that's something that we haven't always seen from Aldo, so it was cool seeing him add a new tool. And I think he'll definitely be a lot faster than Pedro Munoz in this one. But Aldo does have 4 knockout losses, so that's not exactly something that you like to see at this point. But those knockout losses, 2 of them are to Holloway, 1 of them's to McGregor, and then 1 of them's to Peter Yan. So all of his knockout losses are pretty understandable. Pedro Munoz on the other side has never been finished. He is 5-0 by knockout and 8-0 by sub. One thing that makes me nervous for Aldo is, so Pedro Munoz just destroyed the leg of Jimmy Rivera in his last fight. And because of that, he was able to kind of skate out the decision. And I don't really know how Aldo would be able to handle those same leg kicks. Munoz does have a lot of power in his hands. And like I said, he has a pretty dangerous guillotine. And he has pretty solid endurance, so I don't think he's necessarily going to slow down too much in the third either. But Munoz sometimes does get way outstruck by his opponents, and he got way outstruck by Aljamain Sterling in their matchup, and Aljamain Sterling has a somewhat similar reach to Jose Aldo. But Aljo is more high volume than Jose Aldo, so I don't necessarily think that it would end up being that much of a striking differential. Surprisingly, these guys are like pretty much the exact same age, even though Aldo's been around forever. But yeah, I mean, Aldo's a legend, so I know that there's probably a slight bias in this one. But Pedro Munoz, looking in his fight tape, there wasn't really anything that pulled me away from wanting to bet on Aldo. I think Aldo should be able to avoid the submissions and probably land a bit more, probably land the more convincing strikes, and he'll just be a bit quicker than Munoz for all 3. So I'm assuming that he'll win by decision just because Munoz hasn't been finished, like I had said. So then we have the main event, which this one's pretty straightforward. I don't think anyone would disagree with that. We have Derrick Lewis and Cyril Gane. Derrick Lewis 25-7, and then Cyril Gane is of course undefeated and 5-0 in his last 5. His last one, he beat Alexander Volkov. He beat Rosenstruik. He's beaten Junior Dos Santos, Tanner Boser, and Dontel Mays. Derrick Lewis 4-1 in his last 5, with his loss being to Dos Santos. Then he edged out Blagoy Ivanov, beat Ilir Latifi, knocked out Alexei Oleinik, and then knocked out Curtis Blades. Cyril Gane's going to be decently younger in this one. He is 31, while Derrick Lewis is 36. Cyril Gane will be the lighter fighter. And he'll have a 4-inch reach advantage. And really what it comes down to is Cyril Gane, he just looked like way above everyone else in the heavyweight division as far as speed and striking defense. He just really doesn't get touched that much. Has good cardio. And yeah, I mean, Derrick Lewis, his only path to victory really is just landing that one power shot, but that is an equalizer. So it's scary betting against Derrick Lewis, but I feel like you've got to be pretty confident taking Cyril Gane, especially in a 5-round fight where he knows he could just tire out Derrick Lewis. And if Cyril Gane had to, he really could take down Derrick Lewis, or at least kind of just push him up against the cage and negate the powerful hands. So, yeah, I mean, I don't see it going Derrick Lewis's way. We haven't really seen Cyril Gane get dropped or even really hit that hard because he's just so good defensively. But yeah, this is a fight that I don't even think should happen at all. I think it's pretty messed up that they're doing an interim heavyweight championship. I think Ngannou should be able to defend his matchup, and it's just he didn't win the title that long ago that we need to rush to have an interim one. So yeah, I'm not really too excited about this main event because I don't really believe in it. But I'm going to take Cyril Gane. I would guess that he edges it out by decision, but with how much volume he throws, and I think it's going to be pretty disheartening for Derrick Lewis. I wouldn't be surprised if Cyril Gane's able to just pour it on him and knock him out. But What scares me away from betting that is that this fight's going to be in Houston, so I think Derrick Lewis is going to have that extra motivation to not get knocked out and not get dominated. So I think he'll probably have the heart to be able to stay on there. So yeah, if I was going to bet a path to victory, it's probably decision for Cyril Gane. But yeah, definitely would be all in on betting Cyril Gane in this one. So those will be all my picks for UFC 265. Hoping that this is going to be a better card than the last few. Just kind of had some rough cards recently. Some of it being just judges kind of messing with decisions that I should have got that would have made my nights profitable. And then most recently just having a card where a lot of favorites just didn't come through. And just had some underdogs that were very unexpected wins. So, I think this one should be better. Looking forward to props coming out so I could see some good spots for that. Good luck to everyone out there. I think that this should be a decently entertaining card, even though it doesn't have a whole lot of name value. See everyone next week.